Imagine, just for a moment, that you're sitting down at a table and you're served a piece of dessert that seems, well, physically speaking, absolutely impossible.
Right, like it shouldn't exist.
Exactly. You take your fork, you press down, and the outside of this dessert just shatters. It snaps lightly, almost like a thin sheet of spun glass.
Yeah, but then the inside.
Right. The moment you bite into it, the inside isn't hard at all. It's perfectly soft, incredibly tender, but crucially, it's not a sugary mush. It has actual structure.
Which creates a true culinary paradox. Normally our brains expect a crunch that goes all the way through, like a hard candy.
Or a softness that starts from the outside in, right, like
Exact-
a baked apple.
Exactly. So finding both of those extremes so sharply contrasted in a single bite, it just completely rewires your expectations of what a dessert can be.
It's wild. Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. Our mission today is to explore this crazy stack of historical documents, culinary records, and modern food science.
Yeah, we're looking at sources ranging from an 1844 Ottoman cookbook all the way up to the modern chemistry of molecular gastronomy.
And we are uncovering the secrets of Kireç kabak tatlısı, which translates to pumpkin dessert cooked in quicklime. And as we go through this, it becomes super clear this isn't just a recipe.
Oh no, it's an epic story of how hardcore chemistry met unparalleled craftsmanship.
So, okay, let's unpack this because I just have to know. What kind of kitchen actually conceptualizes using a construction material quicklime on a vegetable?
Well, to understand the origin of this method, we really have to put ourselves in the economic and aesthetic reality of the Ottoman palace.
Right, the palace kitchens.
Specifically within this massive, highly specialized complex called the Helvehane. This was the dedicated sweets and jam kitchen of the palace.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the art of confectionery there was pushed to its absolute limits by hundreds of specialized artisans.
I'm picturing like an incredibly high-pressure environment, massive copper vats, roaring fires, and demands for absolute perfection from the upper echelons of the empire.
You've painted the picture perfectly. The defining economic reality of the Helvehane was that sugar was extraordinarily expensive.
Because it was imported, right?
Imported or just heavily taxed, yeah. It was a luxury commodity. So if a master chef in the palace was going to make a dessert, that final product had to justify the exorbitant cost of the sugar it was boiled in.
Huh. It couldn't just be an ordinary sweet.
Exactly. It needed a long shelf life, it needed structural integrity to survive the banquets, and it required flawless visual appeal.
It had to look like a precious gem.
Right. It wasn't just about tasting sweet, it was about perfect preservation.
It reminds me of modern structural engineering almost. These chefs were building an edible monument meant to last and meant to dazzle.
That's a great way to look at it.
But here's where I have to push back on the premise a little bit. Why pumpkin?
What do you mean?
Well, if the goal is a perfect jewel-like structure, a pumpkin seems like the worst possible candidate. I mean, squash naturally wants to turn into a puddle of mush when you boil it. Why fight nature?
But that tension between the ingredient's nature and the chef's ambition is the core of this dish. Historian Mariana Yerasimos, in her 2010 work on Ottoman cuisine, details this.
What did she find?
She notes that this specific quicklime method was used to force the pumpkin into what they called a fruit form, in a dish known as riseli kabak.
Fruit form, okay.
Yeah, when that pumpkin was placed on the plate, it literally had to shine like polished amber. It was an aesthetic necessity.
So it was all about the visuals.
Visuals and texture. And furthermore, research by gastronomy historian Priscilla Mary Eshan highlights that achieving this was a very conscious, cumulative effort.
It didn't happen overnight.
Definitely not. Helvehane records show a sophisticated knowledge of texture preservation that was passed down and refined through generations of artisans all across the Middle East and Anatolia.
Right, but desire and aesthetic goals don't just change the laws of physics.
No, they don't.
Heat fundamentally breaks down plant cells. So how did these historical chefs actually stop the pumpkin from completely disintegrating in a vat of boiling syrup?
What's fascinating here is that these palace artisans were essentially practicing molecular gastronomy centuries before laboratories even existed.
That is mind-blowing.
It is. And to understand the underlying mechanism, we can look to the food science research of Harold McGee from his 1984 work.
Oh yeah, the classic food science text.
Right. McGee breaks down the chemical reaction beautifully by looking at the cellular structure of the pumpkin itself.
Okay, let's get into the chemistry.
So, pumpkin cell walls contain a complex carbohydrate called pectin. Think of pectin as the biological glue that binds the plant cells together into a solid mass.
Got it. And when you apply heat to a plant, that pectin matrix breaks down. The glue dissolves, the cells separate, and the structure just completely collapses.
Exactly. That is the standard thermal reaction. However, when you introduce calcium ions,
From the lime water.
yes, specifically Kl2+, which are abundant in lime water, when you introduce those into that environment, the chemistry changes dramatically.
How?
Those calcium ions seek out and bond with the pectin in the pumpkin cell walls. And when they link up, they create an entirely new compound called calcium pectate.
Calcium pectate. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting because the calcium from the lime water is physically bonding with the plant tissue.
Yes, on a molecular level.
But why does that matter? Doesn't the intense heat of the boiling sugar syrup still destroy that new compound?
No, and that is the absolute genius of the reaction.
Yeah.
Calcium pectate is entirely insoluble in water and highly resistant to heat.
Oh, wow.
So the calcium ions effectively replace that weak biological glue with a microscopic lattice of concrete.
Like an invisible suit of armor.
Exactly, or a heat shield on a spacecraft.
Uh.
Because that shield is insoluble, it allows the pumpkin to withstand the aggressive heat of the boiling syrup without the underlying cellular structure collapsing.
That is incredible. It makes me think of firing clay in a kiln.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. You take something soft, wet, and malleable, and by introducing a specific chemical and physical reaction, you lock it into a rigid, permanent structure.
And the exterior cells, which get the most exposure to the calcium, form that glass-like crust, while the interior remains protected and tender.
So they were literally altering the molecular structure of the vegetable.
They bent the cellular matrix to their aesthetic will. But, understanding the chemistry is only the theoretical side.
Right, actually pulling it off is a whole other thing.
Exactly. The execution of this requires unwavering precision. The sources outline a very strict manual of operation.
Which, if you're listening and thinking about trying this at home, you can't just go to a hardware store, buy a bag of construction lime, and throw a pumpkin in it.
Please do not do that.
That would be a toxic, inedible disaster.
Absolutely. Mehmet Kamil's 1844 book, Melsut Tabahin, which is widely noted as the first printed Turkish cookbook, explicitly states that this lime water technique is mandatory, and it outlines the strict rules.
Right. The 6 unforgiving rules. Let's walk through them. Starting with Rule 1. The raw material. They didn't use just any lime.
No, they required unslaked lime. The chemical distinction there is vital.
What's the difference?
Unslaked lime, or calcium oxide, is created by roasting limestone in a kiln to remove the carbon dioxide. It's highly unstable and deeply reactive.
So it's looking for a fight, chemically speaking.
Exactly. Slaked lime, on the other hand, has already reacted with water and stabilized into calcium hydroxide. The artisans knew they needed that violent initial reaction.
So when unslaked lime meets water in the prep kitchen,
It bubbles, it releases heat, and it maximizes the suspension of those crucial calcium ions in the liquid.
okay, so they trigger that massive reaction in a vat, but the liquid that results from that is completely cloudy, right? Full of heavy, chalky sediment.
Very chalky.
Which brings us to Rule 2. You certainly wouldn't want to eat that sediment.
You wouldn't, and neither would the sultan. So the heavy lime particles eventually settle to the bottom of the container, leaving a layer of crystal clear water at the top.
And that clear water is what they use.
Yes, this clear water is packed with the invisible dissolved calcium ions. The manual is absolute on this step. The chef must extract only that clear water.
What happens if they mess up?
If even a single drop of that cloudy sediment from the bottom is disturbed and touches the pumpkin, the dessert is ruined.
Wow, just one drop.
One drop. The final product will look dull and matte instead of shiny, and it will carry an overwhelming chalky taste.
I can just imagine the intense anxiety of some young apprentice in the Helvehane, right? Trying to carefully ladle out only the clear water without disturbing the silt at the bottom.
And shaking, yeah.
One slip of the wrist and you've ruined a week's worth of palace desserts.
High stakes confectionery.
Okay, so Rule 3. Once they have that clear calcium water, they submerge the pumpkin. But they couldn't just leave it in there indefinitely.
No, this is the Goldilocks zone. The timing is a very delicate chemical balance, generally spanning 6 to 12 hours.
What happens if it's too short?
If the pumpkin soaks for too short a time, the calcium pectate lattice doesn't fully form. The armor is weak, and the pumpkin will still fall apart in the boiling syrup.
And if they leave it too long?
If it soaks for too long, the calcium penetrates too deeply. The armor becomes way too thick, and the pumpkin turns into an unpleasant, literal rock. You lose the soft interior entirely.
It's all about stopping the reaction at the exact right millimeter of penetration.
Exactly.
So once they hit that sweet spot, they pull the pumpkin out. But now it's covered in this highly alkaline chemical water.
Which brings us to rule 4, the washing phase. The calcium has done its job on the cellular walls, but the chef must remove any residual unbound calcium from the surface.
Right, because it's still alkaline.
Right. The sources describe a really aggressive washing process, rinsing it 5 to 6 times, followed by soaking it in fresh cold water for an entire hour.
An hour just soaking in cold water.
Yeah, and if this phase is rushed at all, the final dessert will carry a harsh, bitter, soapy taste. The cold water soak ensures every trace of the surface alkalinity is flushed away.
Okay, so the pumpkin is armored, it's washed, it's neutralized. It seems like the obvious next step would be to drop it into the boiling sugar.
You'd think so.
But Rule 5 shows they introduced a massive delay at this exact moment, the osmosis phase. They required the pumpkin to sit in cold sugar overnight.
Yes.
Why halt the process when you're so close to the finish line?
Well, think about the physical structure they just spent a day building. They fortified the cell walls into a rigid shell, holding in the pumpkin's natural moisture.
Right, the tiny invisible armor.
If a chef drops that instantly into boiling syrup, the extreme heat causes rapid moisture expansion and contraction.
Like dropping a cold glass into hot water.
Exactly. The sheer thermal shock would rupture the delicate new armor. By packing it in cold sugar and leaving it overnight, they utilize the slow, natural pressure of osmosis.
The sugar draws the water out of the pumpkin gently, while the sugar molecules slowly seep into the cells.
Precisely. It's the opposite of a thermal shock. Slow osmosis respects the physical limits of the chemistry they just initiated.
So the sugar gradually replaces the water inside those newly fortified cells without breaking the walls.
Which sets the stage for the final boil the next day.
Rule 6. The sugar melts into a syrup. The armored pumpkin finally cooks. But there's one last chemical trick hidden in this process to achieve that impossible aesthetic, right?
Yes, the grand finale.
The sources mention adding citric acid, often in the form of lemon salt, at the very end of the boiling process.
This step brings the entire visual presentation together. Even with the meticulous washing, the calcium treatment inherently alters the pH of the pumpkin.
Because of the alkaline lime.
Right, it leans it slightly toward the alkaline side. Introducing citric acid at the very end of the boiling process stabilizes that pH.
That makes sense.
But more importantly for the visual aspect, Harold McGee's Principles of Food Science explain that citric acid interacts with the boiling sugar. It causes the sucrose to invert.
Oh, breaking down into glucose and fructose.
Exactly.
And inverted sugar resists crystallization.
You got it. If the sugar crystallized as it cooled, the dessert would look cloudy and grainy.
Not like amber at all.
Right. So by inverting the sugar with the citric acid, the syrup forms a perfectly smooth, glassy glaze on the outside of the pumpkin. That chemical stabilization is what creates the final mirror-like shine.
I am just marveling at the sheer patience required to develop this. I mean, this isn't fast food. This is a multi-day scientific gauntlet driven entirely by pure sensory observation.
It really is.
They didn't have microscopes to verify the calcium pectate bonds. They didn't have pH strips to test the alkalinity.
Nope, nothing like that.
They just learned through generations of watching. Like, if we skip the cold water soak, it tastes like soap. If we skip the lemon salt, it looks cloudy.
It is a profound testament to the power of generational knowledge. They observed, they refined, and they perfected a complex chemical sequence purely through the rigorous application of craft.
So if you're a chef in Anatolia and you figure out this quicklime trick, you have essentially unlocked a superpower.
Pretty much.
You can put a magical, heat-proof armor on any fragile plant cell. You certainly aren't going to stop at pumpkins. What else do they subject to this process?
Oh, they applied this technique across a fascinating array of ingredients. They looked at nature's most difficult, fragile, or even unpalatable plants and realized they now had the key to taming them.
Give me an example.
Let's look at the eggplant, which is heavily utilized in regions like Anatolia and Hatay.
Eggplant is wildly spongy. It absorbs oil and moisture like a kitchen sponge and usually just turns to mush in a stew.
Which makes it the perfect candidate for this chemical armor. By soaking baby eggplants in the lime water, they reinforced that spongy cellular matrix.
So it didn't collapse.
Exactly. When boiled in syrup, they managed to turn a savory, highly porous vegetable into a structurally sound dessert with a perfectly crispy shell.
Taking a nightshade associated with savory stews and turning it into a crisp confection is wild.
It's totally transformative.
What about ingredients that had flavor flaws, not just structural ones? Did they use it for that?
Oh, absolutely. Green walnuts are a brilliant example of that. Before a walnut forms its hard wooden shell, it's a green, fleshy fruit.
Right.
In their raw state, green walnuts are packed with tannins, making them intensely, aggressively bitter and astringent.
Almost inedible raw, I'd imagine.
Highly unpalatable.
Hmm.
But the highly alkaline lime water treatment does double duty here.
Oh, because the alkalinity neutralizes the tannins.
Yes, it neutralizes and draws out those harsh tannins, completely stripping the bitterness. And at the same time, the calcium forms the pectate armor.
That is so clever.
The final product is a pitch black, highly polished delicacy with a dense, hard texture. They were fixing flavor and texture simultaneously.
Amazing. And what about delicate fruits?
They used it for figs and tomatoes, too. When you're making jam out of a fully ripe fig, the internal moisture and the delicate skin make them highly prone to just exploding in the boiling pot.
Right, they just turn into jam themselves.
Yeah, but the calcium armor locks the skin in place, allowing the fruit to maintain its perfect whole shape, suspended in the syrup. They even used it on citrus and bergamot to preserve the exact intricate form of the rind without it breaking down into a marmalade.
But the application that I think is the absolute pinnacle of this technique, like the final boss of the Helvehane, is watermelon rinds.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Turning literal waste material into luxury.
Think about the structure of a watermelon. You eat the sweet red flesh, and you are left with this thick, tough, completely tasteless green and white rind.
Mostly water held together by a dense network of fibers.
Right. Normally throughout history, that goes straight to the compost pile or to the livestock.
Exactly.
But by utilizing this advanced calcium chemistry, they extracted the white pith, soaked it in the lime water, and transformed outright garbage into a transparent, glass-like, incredibly hard dessert.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we are looking at something far more profound than just a quirky historical method for feeding wealthy people in a palace.
What do you mean?
This was an incredibly advanced system of resource management. It was a way of elevating soft, difficult, highly perishable, or even completely discarded ingredients into something worthy of preservation.
So what does this all mean? When you zoom out and look at the story of Kirishtikabak Tatlusha, you realize that eating a piece of this dessert is an entirely different experience once you know the history.
Oh, absolutely.
You aren't just eating a pumpkin and some sugar. You are eating applied chemistry. You are literally crunching into an invisible calcium pectin armor.
A literal scientific reaction.
Exactly. You are tasting the immense patience of the slow overnight osmosis and the agonizingly slow extraction of clear water.
And the legacy of anonymous artisans.
Yes, it means our ancestors didn't need a sterile, white-walled laboratory to discover profound scientific truths. They learned through trial, through spectacular errors, and by whispering hard-won secrets from one generation to the next.
I completely agree. The true magic of this deep dive lies exactly in that space where rigorous science and intuitive craft share the exact same cooking pot.
They weren't separate.
No, they are not separate disciplines in the Helvane. They are one and the same.
That brings us to one final thing I want you, listening right now, to really chew on.
Right.
We just spent this time learning how, centuries ago, cooks used this intense, brilliant chemical process to transform fragile, squash, and discarded watermelon rinds into glass-like, shelf-stable delicacies.
Delicacies that could last for months without spoiling.
Exactly. They engineered a way to make food survive the elements. Today, in our modern era, we face a massive global crisis of food waste. We throw away staggering amounts of produce because it gets a little soft or loses its aesthetic appeal.
This huge problem.
And our primary solutions, we rely almost entirely on energy-heavy refrigeration and wrapping everything in single-use plastic.
Right.
What if the key to solving our massive modern food waste problem isn't just about inventing a better smart fridge or a new supply chain app? What if the answer requires us to look backward, to rediscover the radical, entirely forgotten preservation chemistry of our ancestors?
It's a really powerful provocation. I mean, sometimes the most innovative solutions for the future are the ones we've simply forgotten from our past.
Well said. Until next time, keep digging into the past. You never know what's waiting to be unpacked.